At the reading of my grandfather's will, my father took the check for $29 million made out to me and lit it on fire. My mother watched it burn to ash in a crystal ashtray, her expression smug. They thought they were punishing the daughter who walked away, the one they had written out of their lives years ago. What they didn't know was that they were acting out the first scene of a play my grandfather had written just for them. And I was holding the rest of the script. I hadn't worn heels in years, but I wore them that morning. I wanted to hear the sharp click of them against the marble floor of the Boston law firm, a sound like punctuation marks underscoring my own quiet resolve. No one else seemed to notice. Not my mother, Eleanor, whose gaze slid right past me as if I were a ghost haunting the corner of the room. Not my father, Richard, who offered only a stiff, dismissive nod. And certainly not my sister, Isabel, who lounged in her leather chair, sunglasses pushed back into her perfectly styled hair, looking bored, as if she were merely waiting for the valet to bring her car around. Mr. Davies, the family lawyer for as long as I could remember, cleared his throat. "We are here to fulfill the final wishes of Mr. Arthur Sterling," he began, his voice a low, steady baritone that absorbed all the tension in the room. I sat last, a habit born from a lifetime of being told to make myself smaller. The conference room smelled of old leather and lemon polish, a scent I focused on to keep my hands from trembling in my lap. Across the polished mahogany table, my mother was already fiddling with her pearls. My father's arms were crossed tightly over his chest, a fortress of indignation. Isabel tapped a perfectly manicured nail against her phone screen. "Arthur made specific allocations," Mr. Davies said, unfolding a crisp document. "To his daughter, Isabel Sterling." My sister sat up straighter. "He leaves the cottage on Nantucket and his collection of antique maps." Isabel blinked. "I'm sorry, that's it?" Mr. Davies ignored her, his eyes continuing down the page. "To Richard and Eleanor Sterling, his son and daughter-in-law. He leaves the heirloom grandfather clock and a $20,000 charitable donation to be made in their name to the city library." My mother made a small, strangled sound. "Excuse me? A donation?" "This is a joke," my father scoffed, his face darkening. "And to his granddaughter, Clara Sterling." Mr. Davies paused, turning his gaze directly to me for the first time. "He leaves his entire financial estate, totaling $29,450,000. The silence in the room was so absolute you could hear the city traffic humming 20 floors below. "What?" my father barked, the word exploding into the stillness. "It was notarized and witnessed 3 months ago," Mr. Davies said, his tone unyielding. "He was of sound mind. It was a deliberate change." "That can't be right," my mother insisted, her voice rising. "She abandoned this family. She hasn't spoken to us in 5 years. She doesn't get to walk back in here like some martyr and collect a fortune," my father roared, slamming his hand on the table. Mr. Davies, to his credit, remained perfectly calm. He reached under the table and produced a thick, sealed envelope. My grandfather's wax seal, a simple silver oak leaf, was pressed into the back. I reached out and took it, my fingers steady. Inside was a folded check and a short, handwritten note. For the one who stayed silent and stayed strong. I saw everything. Before I could read it twice, my father's hand shot across the table and snatched the check from my grasp. He held it up, inspecting it as if it were a forgery. My mother ripped the note from my other hand. "Stayed silent? You mean ungrateful?" She tore it into tiny pieces, letting them flutter onto the table like bitter confetti. Isabel leaned back with a smirk. "Oh, please, don't play the victim, Clara. You're the one who cut us off. Grandpa just felt sorry for you." But my father was already pulling a gold lighter from his pocket. "Richard," Mr. Davies warned, standing up. "She is not buying her way back into this family," he growled. He flicked the lighter, and the flame caught the corner of the check. It curled inwards, turning from cream to black, the smoke rising in a delicate, mournful spiral before he dropped the ashes into the ashtray. "Now," he said, his voice thick with a triumphant rage, "we're even." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just watched the last wisp of smoke dissipate into the air. What they didn't know was that the check was a decoy, a blank, worthless stand-in I'd found in Arthur's desk weeks before he passed. He had warned me they would try to destroy whatever they couldn't control. "Let them burn something, Clara," he'd whispered, his voice thin, but his eyes sharp. "It will make them feel powerful." The real assets were in a trust, untouchable, the transfer already complete. The documents were in a folder tucked safely in my coat pocket. So I smiled. Not the kind of smile you wear for photographs. It was the kind that dawns slowly, like the first light after a long and brutal winter. They thought they had won. They had no idea the game had just begun. I stood up, placed the empty envelope on the table amidst the ashes of their victory, and walked out. No final words, no dramatic retort. Just the steady, rhythmic tap of my heels on the marble floor, a sound that echoed louder and louder as I left them behind. The next morning, I drove to a quiet, discreet building in the Back Bay. It wasn't a bank, but a private vault and estate management firm my grandfather had used for decades. The manager, a kind-faced man named Mr. Harris, greeted me with a solemn nod. "Miss Sterling, your grandfather made all the arrangements. He said you would know when to come." He led me down to a subterranean level, the air cool and still. He unlocked a heavy steel door and gestured me inside a small private viewing room. "Take all the time you need," he said, before closing the door behind him, leaving me alone with a single black, fireproof briefcase on the table. On top of it was a small brass key and another note in Arthur's familiar script. "The key isn't for this box. It's for Unit 19B. You'll know the place." My heart pounded as I opened the briefcase. Inside was a laptop and a single USB drive labeled with my initials. I plugged it in. A video file was the only thing on the drive. I clicked play. My grandfather's face filled the screen. He was in his study, looking tired but lucid, his eyes locked on the camera. "Clara," he began, his voice raspy but clear. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone. And if I know my family, they've already shown you their true colors." He sighed, a sound heavy with years of disappointment. "I saw what they did to you, sweetheart. The way they took your college fund for one of your father's investments. The way they dismissed your dreams because they didn't fit their narrative. They called you difficult because you wouldn't bend. That was never a weakness. It was your greatest strength." He leaned closer to the camera. "The money was never the real inheritance. Your name is. Your integrity. They can't stand it, so they'll try to take it. When they couldn't get me to write you out of the will, I knew they would try something else, something worse." His eyes held mine. "They're not just trying to disinherit you, Clara. They're trying to erase you. That key I left you, it opens a storage unit. Unit 19B at the old Sterling Textiles warehouse off the interstate. Everything you need is there, all the proof. Don't trust the lawyers they hired. Don't trust the documents they present. Trust only what you find in that unit. Be smart. Be silent. And then, be the storm they never saw coming." The screen faded to black. I sat in the sterile silence of the vault, the air humming around me. They weren't just stealing from me. They were trying to erase me. The old Sterling Textiles warehouse stood forgotten at the end of a cracked asphalt road, surrounded by overgrown weeds. It was a place of ghosts, a monument to a time before my father's mismanagement ran it into the ground. I found Unit 19B at the far end of the facility. The brass key slid into the rusty padlock, and turned with a satisfying click. The metal door groaned upwards, revealing a space filled with dusty boxes and sheet-covered furniture. But right in the center, as if placed on an altar, was a heavy metal lockbox. I didn't need a key for this one. The combination was my own birthday. Inside, my breath caught. It was all there. My original, unaltered birth certificate listing me as Clara Ann Sterling. The official, notarized final version of my grandfather's will, dated 2 weeks after the one their lawyer had presented, naming me sole executor and beneficiary of the entire Sterling Trust. And underneath that, the master stroke, the original deed to the very land the family estate was built on, transferred quietly into a trust under my name 5 years prior. They were living in my house. This wasn't just fraud. This was a coup. I pulled out my phone and began photographing every single document, uploading them to a secure, encrypted cloud server. As the last file uploaded, I dialed a number I had found in Arthur's notes, a name circled in red ink: Evelyn Reed, Probate Asset Litigation. Miss Reed's office, a calm voice answered. "My name is Clara Sterling," I said, my own voice steady and clear. "I'd like to schedule a consultation regarding estate fraud and contested identity. And I have proof." The night before the hearing was the first time I slept through till morning. There was no fear left, no anxiety. There was only the cold, quiet clarity of purpose. I walked into the Suffolk County Probate Court with my spine straight and my gaze forward. Evelyn Reed, a woman whose sharp intellect was matched only by her immaculate gray suit, walked beside me. My family was already there: Richard, Eleanor, Isabel. They sat with their lawyer, whispering and smirking, radiating an aura of untouchable arrogance. They didn't even look at me. To them, I was a nuisance, a ghost they had already exorcised. The hearing began, a slow drone of legal formalities. Their lawyer presented their case, citing the fraudulent will and painting me as a greedy, estranged relative attempting to steal what was rightfully theirs. Then Evelyn stood. "Your Honor," she began, her voice cutting through the stuffy courtroom air, "we are not here to contest the will presented by the respondents. We are here to dismiss it as a fraudulent document and submit the true, final will of Arthur Sterling." She presented the will I had found in the lockbox. My father leaped to his feet. "That's a forgery." The judge, a weary man with eyes that had seen every shade of human greed, silenced him with a look. "Miss Reed, do you have proof of this document's authenticity?" "I do, Your Honor," Evelyn said. She connected the USB drive to the courtroom's monitor. "I have a video, a final statement from Mr. Arthur Sterling himself, filmed 1 week before his passing." The lights dimmed. My grandfather's face once again filled the screen. He looked frail, but his voice was iron. "If you are seeing this," he said, looking directly into the camera, "it means my son has done exactly as I feared. He has tried to steal his daughter's legacy because he was too proud to build his own. The will they have is a product of coercion. The one Clara holds is the truth. My name is Arthur Sterling, and Clara is my rightful heir. She is the Sterling legacy." The video ended. The courtroom was utterly silent. My mother was sobbing quietly into a handkerchief. My father's face was a mask of disbelief and fury. Isabel just stared, pale and defeated. Judge Kinley leaned forward, his eyes fixed on my father. "Mr. Sterling, this court has seen many things, but rarely has it witnessed a deception so malicious perpetrated against one's own child." He turned his gaze to me. "Miss Sterling, the court finds in your favor. You are affirmed as the sole legal heir to the Sterling Trust and all associated assets." He wasn't finished. "As for the respondents, I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into potential criminal charges of fraud and elder coercion. Outside on the courthouse steps, the city air felt fresh, clean. A reporter rushed forward, a microphone extended. "Miss Sterling, do you have anything to say to your family?" I paused, looking not at the camera, but at the sky above the old Boston buildings. I thought about the ashes in the crystal ashtray, the torn note, the years of silence. "They were fighting over an inheritance," I said, my voice clear and calm. "I was just here to claim my legacy. They are two very different things." I walked down the steps, leaving the questions and the cameras behind. I didn't look back. The money didn't matter. The houses, the stocks, the accounts, they were just numbers. The real victory was the quiet, unshakable knowledge of who I was, a truth they had tried and failed to burn to the ground.